G'day, mate. Well, if that's how you say it. Who banned free speech in Australia? Who's got the right to do that? And who's got the right to speak freely? Well, everyone's got a right to speak freely. It is a basic human right. Therefore, the banning of free speech by any particular person, or by prohibition, or whatever, by a politician, is against the human rights. So therefore, the recent banning of free speech by the banning of the freedom to hear what David Icke says in the public, although it didn't make any sense because we can hear him on the internet, does say to that there's a human rights law being broken there in the Charter of the UN Charter of Human Rights. Free speech is a given. So, and now free speech must mean the freedom to hear. I mean, that's the most important part of free speech, is the freedom to hear, because that's more important than freedom to speak. And so, as I say, something that people really have to consider when a government goes against the Charter of Human Rights in a democracy. It becomes a very serious issue for people to consider, because we can't tell when did the government get the mandate to start saying, when did we vote? When did the government say, well, we're going to start cutting down on what can be heard in Australia? I don't remember any politician saying, vote for us, we're going to start banning free speech and or free hearing of speech. But you know, that's something that ought to be considered. When do governments get away with not telling everyone what they've got what their intentions are? And therefore, before all elections, the government should give a list of exactly of what their legislation or the policy will be, and it should be fixed. That should be fixed, enshrined in law before the election. I mean, if that's your mandate, if that's your policy, a series of policies for the next 3 years, it should be enough, articulated enough and logical enough for you to be able to present that to the public before the election, and that's, you can't go beyond that. You can't suddenly go beyond those the restrictions of your own policy within when you get a victory at election, because that means you have a mandate. The public has then agreed to that mandate that you have, a mandate for your policies. If you suddenly say, if you've got agendas there that are not declared at the election, then there can be no mandate for them. That's just simple common sense. But when it comes to the blaming of the Jews for the banning of free speech in Australia, no Jews have banned free speech. It is reported that some Jews made a complaint about David Icke speaking, but then they weren't the only ones. I've seen there was Australians also making complaints about David Icke speaking. So it wasn't just Jews, there was Australians on TV and other people I saw on the internet. I don't watch TV anymore, but I saw it on the internet. Some people who were on Australian television were complaining about David Icke speaking. I mean, who these people think they are to say, well, they can complain about David Icke speaking, but if they think they've got this right to tell us, all the rest of us, what we can hear, well, you know, they've got another thing coming. They're actually out of order, and they're not so actually un-Australian as you can get. That's for certain. But to blame the Jews might be a bit misleading here, because the Jews haven't banned the freedom of speech, or the Jews did not ban David Icke coming to Australia. The minister in the government of Australia, the Commonwealth government or the federal government of Australia, banned David Icke coming to Australia. So it wasn't the Jews who did that. So you have to ask yourself, what was the real reason? It was probably because there's election due shortly, and the Labour Party and the Liberal Party are very, very concerned about their climate change energy agenda. No longer makes sense to the majority of the public, regardless what the media says, regardless what they say, regardless what politicians say, regardless, majority of the public already get well and truly that Australia cannot do much about the climate, no matter what it does. So that's the thing that I want to concern us most. And I'm going to make this short, because the thing is about free speech, to talk about this elite, the elite controlling free speech, well, you can't be an elite and be afraid of free speech. You cannot be elite if you're afraid of free speech, you're not elite. You don't have, if you're afraid of what other people's arguments are, then quite possibly your argument is inferior. Your agenda, if it's based on some kind of a thing that you can argue, if it's solid and practical and positive for the people, you should be able to argue with that in that context, a rational context, and then be able to allow an alternative argument without squashing that argument. If you cannot do that, then it's an inferior stand, always, and it always has been, always been proven to be an inferior stand to ban free speech. No, I mean, we've seen it over and again. Stalin, the Catholic Church in England, in Europe, whatever, before Martin Luther, you know, all through the history, this is Stalinism and Hitlerism and Mao Zedong and Pol Pot and all these regimes that sort of, and Cuba and all that, we've all been against all that. You know, the Western society has been standing against all these things. Now it's suddenly joined them in banning starting to ban free speech. It's quite disconcerting, but it shows you they do not have confidence in their own agenda, that it's got a popular support, or, you know, whatever you say, a mandate can't really get a mandate, because unless it can be counter-argued and allowed, and that the counter-argument can be defeated rationally, without shouting, without insulting, without just do it rationally, and using maths and science and geography and all our history and everything to ascertain your premise for your argument. If you can't do that, maybe you haven't got an argument, and I suggest that's the most, that's your usual reason. There's an agenda to control, but that's all it is, and that's all. It's usually from an inferior perspective as well, to control people from an inferior philosophy, just for the point of control, but not with a reason other than to control. It always has been and always will be an inferior philosophy. But it wasn't the Jews who banned freedom of speech in Australia. It was not the Jews at all. So it's no good blaming someone because we don't admit it was one of us. We don't admit it was one of our own, or some of our own, that have banned, trying to curtail freedom of speech. Blaming everyone else, maybe we're ashamed of that. It's one of our own.